Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Maturko. I am the research manager here at the Innocence Project, and I'm excited to welcome you to the latest edition of our Just Data series, where we showcase the latest research that is helping to advance the innocence movement, try to connect scholars across different disciplines, and make sure that we are seeding new research, hopefully inspiring you expert researchers out there to explore unexplored questions that will help support the day-to-day research and legal and policy work that we are doing at the Innocence Project. I'm here to just give you a brief preview of today's program. So to start things off, you'll hear from our executive director, Christina Swarns. She will pass the mic to Jamie Henderson, who will introduce our two truly extraordinary guest speakers today. They are each bringing unique insights to criminal legal system research based on their direct lived experiences. They'll present a bit about their work, and then we will dive into a moderated conversation to explore some topics further. We'll, of course, make sure to save time for your questions, so please send those along to us. And then my colleague, Nate Hutchinson, will wrap things up and share an important announcement about an ongoing case. This webinar is being recorded and we'll distribute it to everyone who registered. And now, without further ado, I am happy to introduce a recently recognized Forbes leader with impact and our very own executive director, Christina Swarns.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I have to begin by expressing my gratitude to the Innocence Project's data science and research team, Vanessa Maturko, Jamie Henderson, and Nate Hutchinson, who produced and curated this groundbreaking conversation. As an organization, the Innocence Project is intentional about ensuring that the work we do is grounded in firsthand experiences of those who know most about wrongful conviction, the people who survived it. We therefore have freed or exonerated people working on our staff and serving on our board of directors, and we have an exoneree advisory council supporting work across the organization. So it goes without saying that we also recognize the importance of having freed and exonerated people play a central role in the research that is critical to our mission to free the innocent, prevent wrongful convictions, and create fair, compassionate, and equitable systems of justice for everyone. We rely on data analysis, social science, and research in everything we do. In the briefs we file in court on behalf of the wrongfully convicted people we represent, in the policy campaigns we lead to change laws and prevent future miscarriages of justice, in the strategies we employ to support our clients upon release after decades of wrongful incarceration, and in the communications campaigns we use to promote broad public education about the wrongful conviction crisis. We are acutely aware that the perspectives of those who collect and analyze the data underlying that research matters. Those with the lived experience of wrongful convictions are uniquely able to identify otherwise overlooked research questions and prevent gaps and biases in the analysis. So I am thrilled that we are about to hear from two researchers who do exactly that. They bring the insights and critiques from their own experiences with wrongful conviction to critical research in the field. To tell us more and introduce our presenters, it is my pleasure to pass the mic to Innocence Project Director of Data Science and Research, the brilliant Dr. Jamie Henderson.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Christina. I am so excited to introduce our two expert guests today. The very first is a talented mathematician and research assistant at the Deason Criminal Justice Reform Center, Carlos Sanchez. And I will now turn the floor over to him to talk about his research on indigent defense.
Hello. First, I'd like to thank everyone for having me and for this opportunity to speak. So I'll begin with the Gideon Project, a little bit of what that is. So for those who are not from New York, when the Supreme Court and New York State realized that they were supposed to provide lawyers to people who couldn't afford it, New York, instead of creating a top-down public defender's office or legal aid society, excuse me, um, decided that each county had to create their own system and fund it themselves, which created a hodgepodge of different kind of services for for the indigent defendants. Very recently, the New York's uh, and CLU decided to sue the state in order to say that the lack of funding was tantamount of inefficient assistance of counsel. They won the lawsuit, and now in 2017, New York State decided to fund, but not disassemble the system. So everybody gets money, but within their own system. So the Gideon Project is trying to assess what is working, what works in this county versus what works in that county, what are best practices, but also trying to decide how this funding is affecting the cases in these counties, right? Can't study all of them, so we picked a few. So some of the idea is, because there's no mandate, mostly guidelines, in order to hire more attorneys, lower caseloads, hire more experts. So the idea for the Gideon Project is to try to understand, with lower caseloads, are cases moving along faster? Is the time between arrest and conviction shortening? Is there more communication between lawyers and clients? Are there more motions being submitted? But some of this data, right, is not collected by the counties. So the idea originally was for people to go into some of these counties, pull physical files from boxes to look at what's in the files that we might be able to use. I was hired in 2022, the fall of 2022, to do just that, to go into some of these counties, pull the files, and look into the files. When I was trained, right, I didn't need to be trained into how to read an arrest report or what kind of motions, right? I was told no post-conviction motions, but I knew what post-conviction motions were versus motions within a case, right? I didn't have to be told what a Brady motion is or what a suppression motion was. I knew what they were. Just to give some context, I was arrested in 1992 at the age of 17, spent 25 years in prison. Unfortunately, the Innocence Project was not able to exonerate me before I had to go to the parole board. I was paroled in May of 2017, spent 3 years on parole, got released in the spring of 2020, just as we were locking down for COVID. So only 2 years had passed between the time that I was finally released from the criminal justice system to the time I was hired. So all of this stuff that I was looking at was still fresh for me, right? I knew how to read these things, which was helpful because the guy who was my partner was not a law student, never been arrested before, was also not from New York. So if ever a question rose about some of the data that we looked at, I could answer them for him. And if I couldn't, then we could ask our supervisor. But this, to me, was helpful in cutting down in time, being able to move the stuff along. I was able to try to understand what we were looking at, right? But also, right, every single paper, every single data point triggered memories, right? I would think about everything that I went through at the same time. Later on, when we went into interviewing public defenders, assigned counsels, every time they spoke, they triggered some kind of memory of my experience. And then again, like I've written in the article, it did trigger at one moment something about innocence. And then as I'm doing this research, I realize that every experience that I have, every moment that's triggered is not valid for this project. And that I had to understand that I can't just bring it all up. That I needed to figure out within what bounds to bring my experience in. Because I couldn't just leave it aside, because then what's the point of having my experience in this research? At this, so even within that, the boundaries of what the project is meant for, I also have been realizing that I also have to be open and willing to let the data push back against my own preconceived notions about what I think the data should say or would say or have said, right? Because I bring preconceived preconceived ideas about the criminal justice system. 25 years in prison, we all had ideas. We spoke, we debated about these things in prison. But those ideas are valid, but also subject to be challenged with new data, because we only had part of the data, what we were living. So as I'm doing this research, as I'm helping out in the project, I realize that my voice is important, but I also can't bring everything to the forefront that may not be relevant for what I have, but I can hold it for future research in some other sense, right? And I see myself in this project as important, and look at myself in the mirror always to challenge myself, not to push an agenda for myself within my own preconceived notions, but also pushing back and forth and understanding the limits of what I'm researching at this time. And it's how I see myself of value to this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. That was really profound. And I look forward to being in conversation. The audience is welcome to place their questions in the Q&A. There's already some folks doing that. So please continue to share your questions with us as they come up. Our next expert is Dr. Andrew Madrigal, who is the Assistant Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice at California Lutheran University. And he is here to share his research about loved ones of those who have been wrongfully convicted. So I will now turn it over to the fabulous Dr. Madrigal. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you to the Innocence Project for having me. As Jamie said, my name is Dr. Andrew Madrigal. I am an assistant professor at California Lutheran University. Today, I will be sharing with you some research that I've been doing for the past few years, my dissertation research on the children of exonerees. But before I get into that, I love to show people the reason that I do this. And so I'll be sharing a quick video with the audience, and then we will get into what I've been doing research on.
How do you get back 9 years of your life?
Andrew, I believe we've lost sound.
8-year-old Kimberly is next.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. I will restart my.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much.
How do you get back 9 years of your life? An Ontario man is reunited with his family tonight, just freed from prison after doubts about his conviction in a gang killing. New Central's Randy Page has the homecoming.
15-year-old Andrew was the first to get to his dad. 8-year-old Kimberly is next. Then 11-year-old Raphael Jr. Devoted wife Veronica got her chance too. A family reunion 9 years in the making as an innocent man has his first taste of freedom. What should we all learn from this? Cherish your freedom. Raphael Madrigal was convicted as the alleged gunman in a gang-related shooting in East LA back in July of 2000. And perhaps the most explosive piece of evidence which could have been used in his defense never made it into trial. It was a secretly recorded conversation between the gang member who drove the car in that drive-by shooting, Francisco Olivares, and that gang member's girlfriend. Speaking of Raphael Madrigal, the convicted wheelman says, Olivares goes on to say, if Raphael Madrigal was guilty of the drive-by shooting, why would he be looking for the real gunman? That's a question that was never asked at his trial. This month, in granting Raphael Madrigal freedom, a federal judge wrote, there is compelling evidence that Madrigal is actually innocent. Based on the evidence, it would have been impossible for Madrigal to be at the scene of the crime. Secretly recorded jailhouse conversations demonstrate Madrigal was not involved in and didn't know who committed the offense. The eyewitness identifications were conflicting and unreliable, and a favorable polygraph was conducted by a 23-year veteran of the FBI.
It's been tremendously hard.
Before his arrival today, Raphael Madrigal's wife, Veronica, spoke about the 9 years she and her children had to live without him. Like the day oldest son, Andrew, graduated from junior high school.
I think that was one of the most emotional things though, because my son wanted him there really bad and
Raphael's two older boys were just toddlers and his daughter not yet born when he was taken into custody in 2000. Veronica says when she looks at the snapshots of their lives, she sees who is missing, and her children do too.
It's very hard not being with him.
Now, moments before her husband's arrival, Veronica tries to find the words she will say to the man she's loved since high school, the man she's waited for all these years.
Come home. And then we've missed him and we've expected him these long 9 years, but he's finally home.
I got my family with me. I got you through it. In Ontario, Randy Page, News Central.
Okay. So, let me. Okay. So, as we just watched this video, that was a video of my dad's release date back in October of 2009. So for his specific case, he was wrongfully convicted of a drive-by shooting that happened in East Los Angeles. Unfortunately, he was 50-ish miles away at work in Rancho Cucamonga. Even then, so he was wrongfully convicted and sentenced to 53 years to life in prison in the state of California, to which he spent over 9 years incarcerated. Thankfully, the California, or at the time, California Innocence Project assisted in his release and exoneration 2 years later in 2011. And if it wasn't for them, I would not be here now speaking to you all. So the work that I'll be talking about today deals with the experiences of people like myself, the children of exonerees, specifically the adult children of exonerees. And so this research comes from my dissertation work, and the title here is Exploring the Impacts of Wrongful Convictions on the Children of Exonerees. And so my dissertation looks at this largely overlooked population. It's a topic I'm deeply passionate about, both as a scholar and someone who's been impacted by wrongful convictions. And so just to get into some of the literature and why it's important to acknowledge this work, as of this morning, there have been 3,734 wrongful convictions recorded by the National Registry of Exonerations in the United States. There's been, we're fortunate that within the past 20 years, there's been extensive research on wrongful convictions, thinking about the canonical factors, so what causes wrongful convictions, the consequences of wrongful convictions, as well as some amazing researchers doing work on the reentry aspects of the reentry aspects that exonerees go through themselves and the differences in comparison to other formerly incarcerated people. Now, there is a growing body of literature on parental incarceration and what that does to people, but there's this critical gap in terms of knowing and acknowledging the experiences of the children of wrongfully convicted people, people like myself. And so this distinction matters because these children carry not just the loss of a parent, but the knowledge that that loss was due to a fundamental systemic failure. And so for my dissertation, the research questions that I kind of posed as I was going through this, and I'll just go through these briefly due to the time that we have here today. But again, it's focused on understanding the impacts of wrongful conviction on the children of exonerees. So looking at how does the experience of wrongful conviction shape the lives of their children? What challenges do the children of exonerees face pre-incarceration, during their parents' incarceration, and post-release? How do the children of exonerees navigate and cope with the trauma of their parents' wrongful incarceration? How does the nature of the relationship between an exoneree and their child affect their child's experience of wrongful conviction and vice versa? And then lastly, how does the experience of wrongful conviction and incarceration affect participants' perceptions of their own life trajectory? And so the theoretical lens that I utilize for my dissertation research deals with the life course perspective. So to truly understand the profound and lasting impact of wrongful conviction on families and specifically on children, in this case, adult children, I needed a theoretical framework that could address the complexities and interconnectedness of these family members' lives and how their experience was both shaped and are shaped by their circumstances. And so three specific portions of the life course perspective that I utilize for my research are linked to lives. And so this principle is crucial because it recognizes that a parent's wrongful conviction isn't just their experience. It profoundly impacts the child's trajectory through shared trauma, stigma, and altered family dynamics. Secondly, agency. And so thinking about how individuals construct their lives via the choices and actions within the given opportunities and constraints on their lives. And then lastly, the timing and the importance of the timing of when events occur in people's lives. So going into the methodology, this was a qualitative study to gain a more deep and nuanced understanding of these people's lives that numbers just couldn't understand. And so for data collection, I conducted in-depth semi-structured interviews with my participants, to which I had 16 adult children exonerees that thankfully, excuse me, sorry, 16 adult children of exonerees that thankfully agreed to participate in my study, as well as 5 innocence advocates, so people who work at innocence organizations who were willing to assist in this research process to give an outsider's perspective. There were some recruitment issues, acknowledging that, getting access to this population was difficult and more difficult than I perceived. And then the analysis process dealt with memo writing and coding. And so getting into the major findings and themes of my dissertation, 3 major themes and findings were found here. So relationships and family dynamics, social, developmental and financial consequences, as well as emotional and psychological impacts. So going first into these relationships and family dynamics. So my analysis revealed several core themes. The first that I want to talk about here are these relationships and family dynamics, right? And so this theme covers how wrongful convictions shape the family unit before, during, and after their parents' wrongful conviction. So the pre-incarceration phase provided this baseline of the relationship like between the child and the parent, as well as their relationship with other people in their family, as well as how this dealt with how the child reconnected with their parent after the fact. And as well as the second portion, the incarceration and adaptation phase that they went through. And so wrongful conviction for my participants caused profound disruption and forced these difficult adaptations. It was difficult for them to maintain ties with their parents. For many, it was done through letters and calls and visits, many of which other children of formerly incarcerated parents dealt with as well. The challenges were they dealt with the costs of potentially going to visit their parent, the restrictions of visiting their parents, and the emotional toll of dealing with it all. As well as this idea of parentification. So they took on these pre-adult roles because in many cases, when you have a parent who's incarcerated, you have a single parent household potentially. And so you have children who are thrust into these adult-like responsibilities. And so this led to altered trajectories for themselves and into which they kind of, they took a fast track to adulthood. And then lastly, the post-release challenges. So trying to rebuild that relationship with their parent was complex due to changed roles, these expectations maybe that they had of their parent post-release, and that their parent had of them. And as well as there was like mixed emotions, relief, along with mixed feelings of uncertainty, right? And so they dealt with a lot in trying to get their parent back to them. Now, I'm going to share with you all, and I think it's important that I share with you all some quotes from my interviews. I think it'll help paint a bigger picture of what people like myself and my participants went through. So here's a quote from my participant, Ronan, to where he says, "I had these 2 universes in my head. One universe was that he was a monster. And the other was he was a dad I loved. By the time we actually met up, it felt so confusing and so right at the same time. But that confusion took a long time to settle." So I wanted to share this quote because it shares a particularly stark look at the complexities that families navigate. And so going into this research, I had some assumptions as to what my participants had gone through themselves, right? Thinking about my own experience. But I had never thought about some of the experiences that I couldn't even imagine what some of them had went through. And so my participant, Ronan, actually, his experience was extremely unique in that he actually, unfortunately, contributed to his father's wrongful conviction. When he was roughly 10, his father was arrested based on what he had told authorities at the time because of information that other family members had told him to say to authorities. Essentially, he was lying about things that had happened to him because family members were attempting to wrongfully incarcerate his father. And so for years, even after his father's release, Ronan genuinely believed that these things had happened to him. It was the things that had happened to him were sexual assault by his father. And it was only after a direct, difficult confrontation post-release where he heard his father's full account that his perspective began to shift. He reflected on that moment and its aftermath. And so his experience demonstrates that rebuilding isn't just about reconnecting after that absence. Sometimes it involves confronting the direct harm within the family dynamic due to the circumstances of the wrongful conviction. Right? Like I said, this is a very unique situation in that he actually contributed to his father's wrongful conviction. Now, being a 10-year-old, he had no idea what was going on, right? He was influenced by others in his family to say what he said and do what he did. But that took years, not only from his father, but that relationship that he had with him. Okay. And so thinking about the social, developmental, and financial consequences, right? For my participants, they went through pervasive stigma. So they faced hostility from their peers, their communities, their schools, as well as racial bias and media essentially sensationalization of the case if it had gone into the media. There were rumors and bullying, and they were ostracized, and just outright hostility from those in the community towards them, right? And so this forced my participants into these coping strategies. So some withdrew, some confronted the issues that they were dealt with. And the consequence of this was this shaped trust and social integration at a young age, right? They didn't know how to deal with their situation, and who would, okay? And so secondly, their identity, right? The way that they formed their identity. So the wrongful conviction fundamentally reshaped their sense of self. So again, this forced them into these pre-adult roles. Some of them became the bigger sister. Others became an advocate and investigator for their parents. Some, were the family defender, and they kind of portrayed this perfect child persona, as well as they were a spokesperson and emotional anchor for their parent. And so the impact of this was that they sacrificed the typical childhood that we assume that most people have. And it also created an internal conflict of responsibility as well as their own individual needs. Okay. And then lastly, this idea of age stagnation. And so what I mean by that is there was this researcher who a few years ago published her work. Her name is Amanda Lewis. And she did some work on families of exonerees as well. And so what she found, and what I found as well, is that when exonerees are released back into society, they are essentially at the age socially that they went in at, right? They are emotionally and socially frozen at the time that they were arrested. And so while they age, chronologically, key aspects like their coping mechanisms, their social understanding, their emotional maturity, all remain rooted in the past. And so this left issues in trying to rebuild the relationships with their children. Now, the second quote that I wanted to get into was a quote from my participant, Maria, where she states, "He says you're the oldest daughter. I've been hearing about the new trial. I don't know how he's getting away with it." That was when the anger starts to show. I told him, "You don't know the first thing about anything." He makes the comment, "I can see you have that blood in you." I almost lost it. People hardly even know me or my dad, and they still act like it's their place to accuse. So to illustrate like this, someone has showed up to Maria's house after her dad was arrested, or after her dad was released back into society, and still believed that he had done it, right? And so there were people who still had this perceived judgment of what her father had done and didn't let her family continue just to live their lives. Secondly, in terms of emotional and psychological impacts, and I'm going to speed up a little bit just based off time, my Participants showed that they dealt with a variety of issues, as well as anxiety, depression, grief, anger, guilt, fear. The way that they cope with these things were both adaptive and maladaptive. Some of them went into advocacy and some work at innocence organizations. Others, their siblings or maybe themselves went into substance use due to the issues that they dealt with. And some of them found meaning in what they went through, right? Some of them were able to show this advocacy and want to create change so that people didn't have to go through what they went through. Now, the policy implications for my research. I believe that we need more family-centered services, counseling, support groups for these people. Right now, currently, there are many compensation statutes around the United States that provide different forms of monetary and non-monetary compensation to exonerees, but their families are kind of left to deal with what they went through, right? And so everything should be holistic and thinking about structured reentry services, housing, job support, trauma-informed mental health care, as well as thinking about supporting the families in terms of caregiver aid, family reunification, if the child was is in foster care, targeted programs for the children's emotional and educational needs. And then lastly, some exonerees deal with expunging their records. Some of them still have records, some of them do not have automatic expungement once they are released back into society. And so there's this lingering stigma and these practical barriers that they deal with. And so mandating automatic complete expungement upon the release for a clean slate, as well as anti-discrimination laws for these people in terms of housing and employment. And so in conclusion, and thank you all for being here with me, the harm goes beyond the exoneree, right? Children, families, they all face this profound and lasting collateral damage from the wrongful conviction, as well as the communities. Everyone's affected by a wrongful conviction, and I think it's important that we address these issues so that this doesn't happen going forward. Secondly, resilience does not equal justice. Children's strength doesn't erase what they went through, and I think it's important that we acknowledge that and in policies going forward. And then lastly, true justice requires addressing the entire affected family. And I think I've kind of talked about that a little bit today, but I want to thank you all for being here with me today and allowing me to share what I've been doing for the past few years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew. That's really incredible research that you're doing. I just want to say before we, get into our conversation that the research and work that, both you and Carlos are doing, I think is rare and distinctly powerful because of what, you each bring to the table. And so I think that, I'd like to get our conversation started off on something that Carlos touched on a bit. Talking about balancing, this inside knowledge of like knowing what these motions meant and this, lived expertise, and then also, there's this trauma that's involved that you have to kind of work to overcome. I think as researchers, when we're collecting any kind of data, we all have these biases that we really try to be aware of and, mitigate or mediate in our work. And I'd like to talk about that a little more. And I'm wondering maybe, Carlos, if I can start with you first to see if you have, anything else or any insight to share about how you do that balance and how you, keep yourself mindful when you're both, collecting data from those files and then also, maybe analyzing the data or working to extract inferences or any sort of next steps.
So yeah, I think I don't think that this kind of thing came to me instinctively. On the one hand, as a person who has a math degree, who got a math degree while in prison, and understanding what numbers are supposed to trust the numbers, right? That if you're going to trust the numbers, you're going to be objective about the numbers, right? And then I'm looking at, I'm trying to help a project that is trying to understand the system of indigent services, that does not only deal with innocence, right? It deals with people who are guilty, but may deserve a different kind of justice, right? Some people get overcharged and is like, well, he didn't do this, he did this, or he needs help. He has substance abuse issues, whatever it is. And so I have to expand what I'm feeling and not say, I'm looking at these data points through the lens of innocence, even though all of these data points are touching at that part of me, right? And so I have to kind of, on the one hand, touch my mathematician part of objectivity, but at the same time, if I don't bring in some of these lived experiences, the triggers don't have to be all bad.
That's right.
Right? Because it'll trigger a memory, and I can say, well, I felt this as an innocent person, but if I was not innocent, I know people who weren't innocent, who this law or this application of the law would have, I saw how it affected other people. Maybe it was harsh, maybe it was overblown, maybe it was too much, whatever it was. But I have to like expand myself a little bit, bring my experience in, but also say it can't be just through the lens of innocence. It has to be through the lens of everything else. And so, especially because we're looking at whether or not the system is improving to bring justice to everyone, not just the innocent, right? And justice to society, because society wants people who are not just warehoused in a jail cell or in prison, but also want people who come home after a prison sentence better than they went in.
Yeah.
Right. And so these are all the conversations that I have to bring to the research, not just my experience as an innocent person, right? Especially since the research isn't about innocence. Even though I sometimes look at some stuff and get angry, this is how an innocent person gets locked up, or this is how an innocent person gets convicted. Well, yes, that's true, but that's not what we're asking here for this project. I can hold it for some future project if I need to have it as an extra experience for a later project. But for now, I have to use my experience to ask the questions relevant for this study.
Yeah, I think that makes a good deal of sense, and you do a really good job of explaining how your, experience and wisdom is both an asset and sometimes challenging, right, in a complex system. And so, Andrew, I'm wondering if you can, share insights, similar insights from your work in being the child of an exoneree.
Yeah. So, and I appreciate the question. In thinking about like my own personal experience and going into the work that I was doing or that I am doing, I don't think I had a true understanding of what others like me had went through. I had assumptions, right? But everyone's experience is different. And so being both a researcher and the son of an exoneree, it pulls me into different places emotionally, right? Trying to create connections with my participants, but also making sure I'm objective in the sense of like the interviews that I'm providing, right? And so when I was conducting these interviews, I had to post interview, do these memos to kind of reflect in terms of like what I saw in the interviews, like what my participants were going through, as well as trying to not compare so much as what I went through to what they went through, because like I said, this is all our own experience, and making sure that I acknowledge that. And that's what reflexivity is about, right? Being able to acknowledge my own personal experience, and I provided a statement in my dissertation about like, this is who I am, this is how it informs my research, but it's not going to change the research in a negative way. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question.
No, it's incredible, truly. I mean, it's really hard. It's a very difficult balance. And I think the two of you are doing an incredible job. And I'm so thankful for the work that you're doing and sharing with us. The next thing I'd like to explore, I guess I'm curious about, and Andrew, I'll start with you first on this. Like, what about, is there anything, I guess, about the process or the results of your research that really surprised you, that you weren't expecting to see? I know you touched upon, the difference in experiences, but I'm wondering, maybe, is there anything else?
Yeah, so the first thing, and I think I kind of touched upon this in the presentation, but one of my participants contributed to his father's wrongful conviction. I did not expect that, right? And that person being able to acknowledge that and have a relationship now with their father I think is amazing, and kind of speaks to the process of them growing their relationship to what it is now. And as well as, I didn't really expect to have, I think there were maybe 4 or 5 of them, participants who were in the foster care system while their parent was incarcerated. A few due to having the other parent pass away during their parents' wrongful conviction and incarceration, and another just due to family issues itself. But yeah, I didn't, in thinking about the experiences, I didn't think I would see stuff like that. But I'm grateful that I was able to see that, because like I said, everyone's experience is different. And I think that helps us get at least somewhat of a clearer picture into, everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Carlos, any surprises in your research?
I think there have been. I think before I say that, I want to say about the other question too, is that I appreciate that, from my perspective, that I have a team of people who are not formerly incarcerated, who are looking at this from their lens, and that we can debate, right? I can bring it in, they can check me, and I can check, right? That kind of stuff is important as well. And some of the, I'm a little reluctant to speak specifically about things that surprise me, only because we're still in the midst of research and haven't come to any real conclusions about anything of the data yet, right? We haven't actually, we're still in the collecting and analyzing phases. But just in general, I think if I can say something generally, I remember seeing a discussion and having discussions about whether or not former district attorneys or ADAs should be part of the indigent services or defense attorneys. My own attorney that went to trial used to be a district attorney as well. And I had ideas about this stuff myself. And then just having interviews with people who are in indigent defense who were formerly district attorneys was surprising to me. Without getting into detail, I think that what I can say is that it's complicated.
Yeah.
Not what I thought in the beginning, as in like, right? So yeah, I think I was surprised. I think it's more nuanced than I originally thought it would be. That question itself, whether or not a former district attorney should be a defense attorney. And so that has surprised me a little bit, I think.
Yeah, that is surprising. And I just want to really highlight something very important that you said, whether it's in research or any work, that we do in this arena, that the more diverse perspectives you have, the more diverse your team is, the stronger your product's going to be. So thank you for raising that, Carlos. Let's do one more question before we turn to our audience. And let's see here. Do either of you have any advice for researchers out there who are looking to explore wrongful convictions? I know, Andrew, you and I serve on the Innocence Network Research Review Committee, and we get lots of applications every year. So do you have any advice for researchers out there looking to explore wrongful convictions, or do you have any advice for folks who have been wrongfully convicted that would like to conduct research?
That's a great question. I think we need more people in this space. I think we need to have more research on wrongful convictions, just so we can get, like I said, we can get a clearer picture. Because right now we only have a piece of it. We have a piece of the pie, and I think my advice would be to read what's out there. Read as much as you can. I think it's important to be able to acknowledge the work that's come hopefully before you, the people that are wanting to go into this space, and acknowledge that those that are uh, affected by wrongful convictions, whether it's exonerees or their families, um, that if they choose to do interviews with or any type of qualitative work with a researcher, uh, that you are really uh, that you really think about your questions and when asking, right? That's one of the things that we talk about a lot on the Innocence Research Review Committee is, is what they're saying or asking appropriate? Or does it make sense in terms of, uh, for the exoneree and their case or their family? So thinking about those things. And I think it's good to reach out to those who are doing this work. One of my mentors, Dr. Robert Norris, he does a lot of this work, and we have a lot of people throughout the US who are experts in this. So reaching out to those people who have done this work to see what they think too, I think is important.
That's great. Carlos, any sage advice?
Well, I personally think that the more diverse research can be is helpful, right? I think that people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system, whether innocent or not, are an important voice as well, as long as they have that same perspective, that they're willing to be surprised by the data, that they're willing to challenge their preconceived notions. The kinds of debates that we've had inside, the kinds of thoughts that we had, those ideas are important to bring to research, right? As long as they're relevant to whatever research we're having, I think they're important. And even if they're not relevant for the exact research you're doing, maybe it can springboard you to bring to some, right? You bring in new data is coming at you. You say, whoa, maybe there's something else. And then you can springboard into your own research somewhere else, bringing in new ideas that you didn't think you had based on new data plus your experiences. It's like I've had ideas. It's like I'm looking at this data and I have ideas, right? That are not centered on indigenous services, but I have ideas like I didn't think about before. So I think these, getting involved for us, whether or not we're justice impacted through innocence or guilt or right, I think our voices are also important. And also, like I said in my article, sometimes when people are doing research on a subject and they're not impacted, it just becomes numbers to them. It's just that, right? And sometimes they don't realize how that data affects us, right? And how we can bring some humanity into that research. Because sometimes not just with this, but with all data, you tell people, look, the data says this is happening, but then the people on the ground say, well, I don't feel whatever your statistic is saying, I don't feel it, right? Because they're not on the ground saying, even though the numbers say this, how is this affecting the people on the ground? But if the people on the ground are part of this data research to understand what's happening, maybe there's more, that extra inclusion might bring data, it's the right word that I want to say, it may connect more with the people who the data is affecting.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And you're right. The more you look at something, the more questions you have, right? The more that comes up and the more that you need to explore. And also thank you for reminding us all that data points, that numbers, they reflect human experiences and they should be treated with dignity and respect. So that's a really good place to pivot to the questions from our audience, of which there are many. So let's get started on that. So let's see here. I think the first question is for you, Carlos. What data are recommended that should be collected as a best practice when you're going in and looking at files from the courts?
Okay, so this is where it becomes tricky because I think this question came up for me in one of the counties that I was in. And it's difficult because the data points that the public defender collects are the things that are relevant to them, what they need to make their office more efficient, right? But that doesn't mean that the data that helps them be more efficient is going to be helpful for any research that I'm doing. They can't collect every single data point, right? So whatever is helpful for this research may not be helpful for the future research or whatever else, right? So it's hard to say, I think that they should collect X, Y, and Z when it might not be helpful for their department to help them be better lawyers or to help them be better for the indigent in their county, right? So that's sort of a difficult thing. I think as long sometimes it's like the more data in a file, the better, but it's not. I don't think that is realistic, right? Like you're not gonna put every single thing because you don't know what people will look for in the future, what people will need in the future. So I think as long as everything is well organized as best as you can, right? Sometimes you get files and boxes of files where you just put the stuff in there and all of a sudden we have to figure out what it is. That became a challenge. So I think as long as everything is numbered correctly and everything is sort of in a row, then future researchers can always find whatever data that's needed. But to have one consistent thing, I think, is difficult.
Yeah, that makes sense. The research question drives the data collection, right?
Right.
Has to be tailored to your question. Andrew, the next question is for you. One of our audience members wants to know how you went about getting your sample and if there was a specific sample size you wanted to achieve.
Yeah, and thank you for that question. How I went about going to get my sample, the first thing that I did was I applied through the Innocence Research Network Review Committee to see what they thought in terms of my research and if this was feasible. Thankfully, they said yes. And then it was my job to reach out to innocence organizations throughout the U.S. In hopes that they could connect me to exonerees who could then connect me to their children, adult children. And this in itself was a very difficult process because one, getting access to exonerees themselves has been proven difficult by researchers, right? I think the current biggest qualitative study in terms of exonerees is roughly 30-ish participants, right? And so I was hoping, and my assumption going in before I even, got my RB approval and went to the Innocence Network Research Review Committee. I was like, oh, I'm a child of an exoneree. I should have access to this population. It should be easy for me, right? I'm one of them. Not the case, right? I thought I was going to get like 50-ish participants. I was hoping for 50. I got 16. And I'm grateful for those 16. Those 16 provided so much insight into things I had never even thought of. So getting a sample of my participants was difficult, but I'm grateful. So.
That's great. And related, Andrew, one of our audience members wants to know if you are aware of any support that exists out there for family members of folks who have been wrongfully convicted.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess fortunately and unfortunately, it depends on the way you look at it. We the majority of support that comes to exonerees and their families is through innocence organizations, right? Innocence organizations who utilize their funds from their nonprofit to assist not just the exonerees in getting them freed and exonerated, right? But in some, they have some reentry support that also assists the family members. But we also have other nonprofits like Healing Justice, as well as Exonerated Nation, Life After Justice, I believe is another one. So there are nonprofits, but my issue is that it shouldn't have to be the job of the nonprofits to do this. It should be something that compensation statutes, state compensation statutes, already do, right? And it's unfortunate that we currently have only, I think we're 4/5 of the way in terms of states having compensation. So I think it's 39, including DC or federal. And so, like I said, it shouldn't be up to the nonprofits to have to assist in getting exonerees and their family support after the fact. It should be up to our legislature.
Great, thank you. The next question I want to talk about is, Andrew, you mentioned that you did qualitative work because you felt that this was something that couldn't be, appropriately captured by numbers or quantitative work. And that makes sense. And so, Carlos, I'm wondering, is your work a mixture of qualitative and quantitative, or when you go and you look at those files, are you dealing most with quantitative data?
I think it is a mixture of research. We are doing interviews as well with people who worked in indigent services. So we're trying to understand, how things have changed over time, right? With the funding, how their offices are working, right? We're also trying to understand exactly like I said, we're trying to understand if with less people on their caseloads, right? Where maybe in the 80s and 90s during real mass incarceration, people may have had thousands of people on their caseload per year. Can we assess whether or not caseloads are coming down and whether or not they can work better per case, right? And so there is the idea of how are caseloads diminishing, and then trying to figure out whether or not the lawyers themselves are feeling those effects, how that's working, right? I think one of the challenges is also about how COVID impacted this, right? And how all of that kind of turned into like the mix of what's happening here. So yeah, we're dealing with interviews as well, trying to understand how the environment is. I think the hope is to try to see about interviewing perhaps clients maybe, but the idea is that it's not just numbers. We're also trying to understand the dynamics of what's going on the ground as well.
Yeah, that's really important. Mixed methods. I like that. Andrew, would you like to say anything more about that, or do you feel you covered that in your presentation?
Yeah, could you repeat the question one more
It
time?
was just, about, determining whether or not to use qualitative or quantitative or both in research to really explore your research questions.
Yeah, and similar to Carlos's point, I think I think we need both, right? We need mixed methods research. We need someone who's able to look at the quantitative data, look at the National Registry of Exonerations and all of the information that they have there, but also do the groundwork with the people who are affected by it. And once and unfortunately we'll never get to like a full picture point, but like as we kind of continue to do this research, we'll get a better and clearer picture as time goes on. So
yeah. Right. Well, that concludes our time together in conversation. I do want to say that our audience members are very engaged, and they are, as I am, so thankful to both of you for all the work that you're doing. And it's so incredible and so powerful. So thank you all for being with us today. We really appreciate you, Andrew and Carlos. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Nate Hutchinson, for a few closing words.
Thank you, Jamie. We hope you have enjoyed hearing from our presenters, Carlos Sanchez and Dr. Andrew Madrigal, and that you learned something about the role that personal experience with wrongful conviction can play in conducting research on the criminal legal system. If you have any follow-up questions or relevant research to share, you can contact the Data Science and Research team at science@innocenceproject.org. Please note that this email address is not an avenue for seeking assistance on a case for legal representation. If you or a loved one is seeking legal assistance, please see information about submitting a case at innocenceproject.org/submit-case. If you're a student or researcher interested in exploring any of the unanswered questions that were raised today, this is your call to action. We'll share a link in the chat to a document on our website that lists topics and specific questions that attorneys, policy advocates, and other colleagues working in the field would love to have answered. We welcome your experience because your empirical inquiry helps support our data-driven work. As many of you know, the Innocence Project is one organization in a broader innocence network of independent legal and advocacy agencies working together to free the innocent, support the wrongly convicted, and change the criminal legal system. If you're interested in conducting research with people who have been wrongfully convicted or with employees of Innocence Network members, you should submit an application to the Innocence Network Research Review Committee and visit their website for guidelines and instructions. We'll post a link to them in the chat too. We would also like to remind everyone that Robert Roberson, an autistic father, is scheduled to be executed by the state of Texas on October 16th for a crime that never occurred. If Texas goes ahead, he will be the first person executed in the US on the basis of the widely discredited shaken baby hypothesis. If you would like to support Mr. Roberson, there are a few actions you can take. You can share our posts on social media to raise awareness, call Governor Abbott and ask that he halt the execution, sign our petition at saveroberson.org, and if you live in Austin, attend the rally on Saturday, October 4th at 1 p.m. on the south steps of the Texas Capitol. Thank you all again for joining us. To our wonderful speakers, thank you for sharing your experiences with wrongful conviction and teaching us so much about how it impacts your own research. Thank you to Christina and the Innocence Project senior leadership team for supporting our research program. And thanks to the rest of the data science and research department here, Jamie and Vanessa, and my colleagues across the organization in communications, policy, and development for helping make this event happen today.